Hello there, thought experiment. You find yourself teleported into a world where dwarves, rats, demons, elves, and the French never existed, replaced instead by an existential orc threat. 5 greenskin hegemons now control 80% of the known world, each starting with 3 tier 5 strongholds, and buffed by mods that make them smarter, stronger, and infinitely more annoying. Well, today, that is my reality. To endure this overwhelming threat, we'll have to mechanize our forces, flooding our ranks with space marines, steel-plated tanks, bombarding airships, choppers with rotary cannons, and your mum's personal favorite, gigantic, girthy cannons. Our goal is to eliminate each orc dictator, but that's not all. For every lord we take out, the remaining greenskin factions will receive progressively larger cash injections, and if we somehow reach the final lord, then he'll get buffs that literally let him cheat, and even a new breed of greenskin. Can humanity evolve in time to survive the orc apocalypse, or will a combination of furious green men, frothing monstrosities, and 200-ton dragons finally breed out mankind for good? Time to find out. Time to big in. Our journey begins in Altdorf, surrounded by Hell's Angels, the dead, and worst of all, other people. Before tackling the orc apocalypse, first we need to secure the heart of the empire itself, Reichland. This will serve as a foundation for us to launch our coup d'etat against the green oligarchy. But we need to act quickly, because looming on our border is one very pissed off obese man who will attack and overwhelm me with the excess cholesterol coursing through his body. Now, I'm no genius, but even I know that the first step to surviving any apocalypse is turning on your fellow man. Leading us is Emperor Karl Franz, a perfect match, considering his foreign policy is a 200-pound thesis called Galmaraz, with a series of handgunner volleys, explosions, and cycle charges. We killed their starting army, then quickly moved on to take Grunberg and Überstreich. We need to move quickly, but the problem is that we need more firepower, and firepower needs money. The solution? Corporate espionage. I sold Grunberg to the local and surprisingly affluent homeless population. Then I contacted the government, told them I could help clean up their streets, and walked back into Grunberg like I never left. The moral of the story? If you extort the less fortunate, then you could be 5,000 gold richer. This allowed me to attack the Empire Rebels' final settlement, having recruited 4 new units of the Ersatz soldiers. They're basically British redcoats who charge into battle wielding rifles equipped with bayonets, and you don't want to mess with the British. Trust me, I'm Australian. Their secret weapon? Pulling out their wood. These can be deployed in the ground to act as an obstacle for the enemy units to overcome before reaching our front line, and for reasons only a neurodivergent psychopath understands. The AI will drop everything to start aggressively renovating our barricades. This buys us crowd control and point-blank accuracy, which is Latin for goodbye. Any units that made it through were then stabbed repeatedly with bayonets to finish the job. With that battle won, we'd crushed the rebels and unified Reichland. Like a Fortune 500 healthcare company, I too was now emboldened by corporate greed. So I decided to launch another attack on humankind. I sold them more land, and it's gone. They didn't like this very much, but their opinions didn't last long. We besieged the city of Marianburg, attacking the opposite gate with Karl and some cav, allowing our entire army to walk in, virtually unopposed. From there, it was a fairly simple process that involved carving holes in their flesh with high-velocity projectiles. With Marianburg taken, we made peace, having successfully damaged mankind more than the orc apocalypse ever could. Speaking of which, we should probably start dealing with that. Much like RFK, I declared war on fat people and immediately took first blood at Grung Zint. Then, like a CEO stealing a hat from a helpless child, I spotted an opening to attack Grom at Kuron, one of his tier 5 settlements, which was completely undefended, although it was garrisoned by some strong units like Black Orcs, who are actually a lot less intimidating when their limbs are vehemently projected from their bodies. I used my mortars to blow a hole through their walls, and sent my lord in to lure them out to the United States of America, all the while shooting arrows and grenades over the walls. After exercising a healthy amount of the Second Amendment, we'd taken Kuron, and now had our own tier 4 city, which we could fashion into a base of operations for our war on obesity. The 5 greenskin dictators had way more land and resources than us, but they still had to build up their armies and settlements just like everybody else. This means that taking land from Grom now would be the easiest it was ever going to be throughout the entire playthrough, because he didn't currently have the ability to recruit armies that look like this. With that in mind, I aggressively started expanding into Bretonnia, annexing it from the Greenskins, but more importantly from their original custodians, the French. We also began researching technology in both the infantry and missile tech trees, as they would both benefit our hybrid units. The next big battle was the Siege of Blackstone Post, where we took on 3 forces made up of jittery crackheads and Reddit moderators. This battle really put our bayonet-wielding riflemen to the test, with our units getting pummeled by giant clubs and disemboweled by rusty knives. Through carpentry, strategic oversight, and more firearms and an American high school, the castle finally fell. Grom might be slow to react because of the size of his gargantuan, shit-stained ass, but he's currently the strongest faction in the game, and he launched his counterattack at Gisserix, taking it easily, then attacked my second army with a force comprised entirely of Mangler-squigs. Basically, this is what happens when you give 2 kids with ADHD a massive line of cocaine and then chain them together. Suffice to say, this didn't go very well for us. To make matters worse, the bikers next door had begun burning all the pubs back in Reichland. Gentlemen, I believe the saying is, shit just hit the fan. To combat Grom, I recruited several new gunmen instantly with a handy little thing called conscription. Then I enlisted 4 new regiments of renown that we'd unlocked, and marched down to confront the fat pig himself. We took up a position on high ground, with our new heavily armoured Uber brothers acting as a sponge to absorb the full force of Grom's frontal assault, with heavy-hitting Mangler squigs and stone trolls. Then our gunners shot everything that fucking moved from behind. Grom himself charged headfirst into our new metal death machines and quickly decided that shit was not a good idea. Whilst he tried to escape, Carl hunted him down, found a meme on his phone, and sent him back to where he came from, with our space marines holding strong against the green tide. Eventually, just their ranged units remained, where we gave them a 30-second lecture on why no one uses a bow and arrow anymore. We managed to win our first major battle against the green regime, but we took some losses of our own. After beating Grom, we moved down to capture most of Bretonnia and had him firmly on the back foot, with our focus squarely on his giant belly. This provided Scarsnik the perfect opportunity to sneak in through the back door and aggressively spread into the Empire, leading to a decline in Imperial authority. In fact, he was literally at my doorstep.
"Hey man, you want any crystal?"
He declared war on me, then took Grunberg, which meant he was right next to our completely undefended capital, whilst Karl was knee-deep in Grom's feces. I believe 2 shits now have well and truly hit the fan. To address our Scarsnik problem, I did 3 things. First, and most importantly, I tariffed the Chinese. Second, I secured alliances with these insufferable pricks and the pretenders. And lastly, I erected a new army and ambushed our attackers. Gentlemen, I present my solution to illegal immigration, the Ironside Guard, a hybrid unit covered in iron plating who has the rare ability to both shoot and stab you in the face. To make them even harder to kill, you can turn them into a square, increasing their mass, boosting their defense, and giving them a 360-degree firing radius, the perfect answer for the ORCPOCALYPSE. We also fielded the Brother Knights, and either those birds have the same 1-rep max as Hafthor Bjornsson, or they're seemingly the most impractical unit of all time. Meanwhile, Karl was pushing deeper into Grom's territory, and we finally unlocked our one-way ticket out of this green dystopia, the Uber Brothers. High-powered, heavily armored death machines, wielding pistols that send corpses flying across the battlefield, and enough raw strength to cave in a man's chest cavity. This is who Iron Man wishes he was. Karl also fought some quest battles, getting the Fortnite equivalent of a gold scar, and a giant wad of cash, which we used to get the Purge of the Foul tech for 7,000, a buff against greenskins, which, might come in handy. On top of that, we stacked Karl's skill tree to boost our armored and ranged units. But, much like hemorrhoids after doom scrolling on the toilet, Grom always comes back. This time, he launched a surprise naval assault with what looked to be an army of small green men suffering from Adderall withdrawals. The perfect opportunity for target practice with our new bombard artillery unit. It came with 3 different shot types, some better for incinerating snot rockets, others geared towards dealing with larger monstrosities, all packed with with 1 metric ton of nitroglycerin. We also got this cuddly beast, who comes with a handy restock ability, effectively replacing the role of standard engineers, with a little more of a I'm gonna rip your throat out kind of vibe to him. We unified Marianburg, and finally convinced the Dommy Mummy next door to let us in, which, yes, triggered the global financial crisis, but also handed us a much larger slice of the empire. With Bretonia fully under our control, we began pushing into the southern realms. At the same time, we locked down trade and alliances with the remaining empire factions, uniting humanity under one universal core belief: racism. I need to tell you something. 3 weeks ago, in the dead of the night, a thief broke into my house. He didn't take my TV, and he wasn't there for my car keys. No, he wanted something far more valuable. All of my sensitive personal information, my banking details, credit card info, and even my browsing history. Basically, the modern day equivalent of your dad's VHS copy of Die Hard he taped over your birth for. In layman's terms, all shit that is incredibly important. So, naturally, I went downstairs and beat him to death with my bare hands. But I was too late, because by the time I'd finished turning his face into a Picasso painting, he had already connected to my network, stolen my valuable data, and uploaded it to the internet. If only I could trade all of those years learning Krav Maga for something that actually protected me. Like today's sponsor, ExpressVPN. With the click of a single button, ExpressVPN encrypts and reroutes 100% of your network traffic through secure servers. That means that my data is not only safe from hacker-thief hybrids, but also from my internet service provider, who, if you didn't know, is legally required to collect all of your data for 2 years in my country of Australia. But it's not just great for privacy and security. Personally, I use ExpressVPN to access Netflix catalogs from around the world. So when the land down under doesn't have a new anime I want to watch, I simply connect to Japan and konnichiwa, genki desu ka? And with the new tiered plans, you can get ExpressVPN for its lowest price ever. Go to expressvpn.com/wins or scan the QR code on screen to find out how you can get up to 4 extra months. Thanks to the team over at ExpressVPN for sponsoring today's video. Now, back to the war. Whilst I was busy fighting the 2 orcs, the Northern Empire was getting that New Delhi treatment, and the locals hadn't yet discovered the invention we now call a shower.
She's goddamn hot!
Much like a co-worker who doesn't believe in deodorant, this problem was only going to get worse, as several Empire factions had already succumbed to the sheer potency of this guy's body odor. We started by destroying Khazrak, then took on 2 Nurgle armies with our newly formed Fumigation Corps, which consisted of heavy artillery, steam tanks, and gunners. But the real stars was our cavalry, outriders with grenade launchers, and the Thrice Pistols. They harassed enemy lines and fired into their rears once they were engaged in combat. Not long after, Festus himself showed up with Beasts of Nurgle, Giants, and Trolls. I had my Thrice Pistols focus on their armored freaks, while our long-range firepower shot at big blobs. Although some of their units made it through to smash our skulls in, we won, and had driven Festus back to that shit-stained hole that he crawled out of, the Brass Keep. I immediately attacked with what I like to call the Texan Shower, and with 2 engineers in my army, we now had a total of 10 restocks, which was cool, but you know what's cooler? Parking my tanks at the front gate and grenade launchers at the walls. By the time we entered the city, the battle was already over. Apparently, the closest battle of all time. We doused the place in the world's entire supply of hand sanitizer and destroyed the vile filth for good. With Azhag lurking around like a gay best friend who watches the UFC, we were faced with a choice: mechanize or die. Surrounded on all sides, surely our only hope was to stack our roster with machines that could withstand the punishment. Luckily, the war on obesity had fueled our military-industrial complex, and we'd upgraded several building chains, allowing us to recruit existential threats to entire communities. The Dieterschaffen class landship, a war machine where the only thing harder than its pronunciation is its cannonballs, and the airship, humanity's middle finger to gravity, firing propelled explosives from the sky. Although I did get a little cocky, sending just these 3 units to face an entire reinforcing army, losing our landship in the process, which on the bright side I won't have to say anymore. But our airship and space marines obliterated the remainders, and with that, Grom's final tier 5 settlement was ours. Meanwhile, Elspeth was dealing with her own problems. If you, or anyone you know, gets swarmed by thousands of tiny goblins, then boy, do I have the perfect solution for you: napalm. The fire thrower cannons do exactly what the name suggests, and in a choke point, you can easily cremate thousands of green morons, crushing any stragglers with your 2,000-ton dragon. Nothing, and I mean nothing, makes me happier than toasting over 4,000 orcs without losing a single man. To further our endeavors on industrializing, I began researching the War Machines tech line to buff our mechanized units. While I was occupied, Grom raised a resistance force and launched a counterattack from underground. I threw a small detachment of Uber brothers his way, but we were overwhelmed, and before long, he'd swallowed the entire forest whole. To address this, I marched down the army that liberated the north. This is, of course, when Wulfric materialized out of thin air and launched a surprise invasion on my now unprotected shores. To make matters even worse, Elspeth lost a huge battle versus 3 orc armies, who were fielding much tougher units now, full of black orcs, spiders, colossal squigs, and other peculiar beasts. Then, Scarsnik seemed to catch a second wind and kicked off a full-scale invasion with stacked War armies. To top things off, Karl was buried so deep within Grom's territory that he couldn't help out with any of these situations, with Wulfric ravaging the north, Grom in the west, Scarsnik the south, and the threat of both Wurzag and Azhag breathing down my neck. Gentlemen, the shit had now literally become the fan. We started by handling the Grom predicament first, taking on a force with 3 colossal squigs, all as fast as Usain Bolt while sharing a build that resembles Mark Henry. Luckily, we had steel sociopaths with poleaxes, who were much better at holding their ground against large creatures compared to their regular counterparts. Rifles and bombards focus-fired one monster at a time, while demigriffs secured our flanks. Somehow, we managed to hold off the brunt of their attack, eventually taking them down with superior firepower. We pressed into the forest, and won a string of battles, finally taking his last settlement. And after 60 turns, we had destroyed Grom the Paunch. With the first of the 5 lords defeated, the remaining 4 had an injection of 50,000 cash, with Wurzag getting Grom's share as he was the strongest. Obviously, this would allow them to upgrade and recruit even more armies now. Our celebrations for killing Grom didn't last long though, because we had to deal with Scarsnik. Not by choice, but because he gave me a crash course on what the Green Dragon 3000 experience felt like. They had much better units and a much larger force, but we had our brains. And access to obscene amounts of explosives. On this map, we could funnel most of them into a single corridor, braced with our front line, and dumped every single fucking bomb we had, resembling 1945 Japan. We vaporized another 3,000 orcs. Karl was then immediately attacked by another tough army. Unfortunately for them, we had 2 tanks, the Heldenhammer and Sigmar's Fury, with range that blankets half the map, and the explosive force of myself after Nando's. We annihilated half of them before they even reached us, and when they did, the tanks had an emergency vent to peel their green skin right off. Back-to-back wins allowed us to claw back some of the land that Scarsnik had stolen from us. By this point, we'd rebuilt Elspeth's army, full of Uber brothers and airships, and just in time, because the benzodiazepine-addicted freak himself marched into the Empire with 50k worth of colossal squigs, spiders, and black orcs. Elspeth dove straight in, chain-casting Spirit Leech and bathing the little man in dragonfire, with most of our troops hidden in the tree line. The airships carpet-bombed the map, right up until 10 squigs and 3 spiders came barreling in to pry our mech suits open like tuna cans. We detonated every warhead we could on their heads, and nearly lost our cute and fluffy bear. But Scarsnik died, and the invasion died with him. Elspeth picked up the Advisor of Neln perk, which reduced recruitment and upkeep of gunners, and the Graveyard Rose, allowing her to regen. With the fresh breeze of momentum at our backs, we ventured deeper into Skarsnik's lands, finally moving to take Akendorf, a choke point which should stop his raids into the Empire. With all going well in the war against Scarsnik, the opposite was happening against the Norskans. We lost our first major battle to Wulfric's forces, even after fielding 3 shiny new toys. Turns out that a pack of pissed off mammoths tear men apart fairly easily. Who would have thought? With Wulfric unchecked, I launched one last ditch attempt at quelling the Viking incursions. Mammoths butcher men on the ground. They do, however, have a hard time flying, so we shot them repeatedly with men on jetpacks, dual pistol Pegasus legacy and sent the herd back to the Ice Age, where they belonged. Our victories over Scarsnik were finally starting to bear fruit, putting him down to strength rank 49. By this point, we'd driven Wulfric out of the Northern Empire and pushed into Chicago, seizing major strongholds in Blood River Valley and Death Pass, while closing in on his capital at 8 Peaks. But by turn 67, I began to understand how that one guy who lost his hard drive felt. Wurzag, who was currently the global superpower, declared war. Then, because I'm a masochistic lunatic, I declared war on Azhag too, who'd been staring at me the same way Ted Bundy looked at a broken down Volkswagen full of sorority girls. Now, we were fighting a war on 3 fronts. Elspeth was holding the east against Azhag, and Karl was leading the charge south against Skarsnik and Wurzag. In other news, the Orc-Apocalypse had made even dead skeletons scared for their lives, all clinging to Big Daddy Karl for child support like a Florida man on his 4th divorce. To kick off our green skin gangbang, I went straight for the most vulnerable target I could, Skarsnik, who showed up ready to rip my head off. But I brought linebackers, whose preferred attire was a refrigerator. Our slabheads gunned down his walking fungal infections, while the Uber brothers in tanks tore apart his trolls. With the drug addict sent back to rehab, we continued our advance into his territory, winning battles with my own special concoction of orc repellent called Fire bombs. And surprisingly, we only had a couple small hiccups along the way. My armies could beat most orc forces head on, but the sheer girth of their forces were overwhelming our soft and supple bodies. I was winning battles, but I was losing ground. About 3 settlements a turn, to be exact. If you ever find yourself in a situation where a large green man with glowing eyes enters your apartment, then the first step is simple. Ask him to leave. If and when he refuses, the second step is simpler. Pull out your gun from behind the dresser. That's the same approach I'll be taking to evict Azhag from the Empire. Over the past 70 turns, Azhag has carved out a foothold in our lands, mostly by turning Vlad into his own personal cuck. Luckily for us, I had just the thing to deal with this sorry bastard. Ladies, and mainly gentlemen, let's be real, I present to you the Steam Copter, a metal, flying war crime that I may or may not have stolen directly from Palantir's Research and Development Department, armed to the teeth, with turrets that hand out free obituaries, and the speed to carpet bomb the map with aerial torpedoes in seconds. Their unit card says it best. We also rolled out 2 new tank types, the Hochland Jagged Panzer for anti-large, and the Bulwark Panzer for anti-infantry. Both, however, are firmly anti-life. Together, these war machines obliterated helpless orcs, trolls, and jumpy ballsacks, decimating a further 2 20-stack War armies, who brought troublesome units like flying feral wyverns. But, much like my life, the real problem wasn't my own incompetence, it was everyone else's, because these idiots didn't bring enough gunpowder, and almost every unit had completely run out of ammunition, so we had to pull up our sleeves and fight them the good old-fashioned way. When we met Green Satan himself, he nearly tore our steamcopters apart and came within inches of killing Elspeth before she trauma-dumped on him for over an hour and bored him to death. For over 70 turns, we'd formed some kind of unspoken truce with Vlad von Karstein, mainly due to our common interest of self-preservation after being accosted by a sea of angry green men. But all good things must come to an end. Luckily, the vampires were about as healthy as they looked, and if I'm being honest, they didn't put up a fight at all. Even with our heavily modernized forces leading the charge, it was the gunners who remained the true backbone of the Empire, taking ground, holding lines, and killing far superior Black Orc armies, all thanks to the power of wood. Over the following 8 turns, my early suspicions had clearly become reality. Elspeth was on a mission to ethnically cleanse the greenskin population with a combination of hellfire from death balloons, semi-automated machine guns, and giant poleaxes. Elspeth had killed exactly 9,432 orcs. We did unfortunately lose an airship, and replacing these things was actually really fucking annoying. Inspired by the genocidal machinations of his fellow lord, Emil Schreiber, the man responsible for the castration of Wulfric, had come down to join in on the fun. Unfortunately for him, this is where his homicidal hobby came to a bloody end, because apparently flying horses and everyday men with jetpacks were no match for an organized and extremely pissed off war tribe. I wonder why. The battle for the Empire came to a head at Waldenhof, where a massive orc contingent met us on solid ground. They came out swinging, literally, and swarmed our machines from every side. But little did they know, Elspeth had only one thing on her mind: revenge for Emil, the man she was secretly having an affair with, behind poor Karl's back. She chewed, clawed, and unleashed purple suns that melted flesh from bone, extinguishing over 900 orcs by herself. With our queen's diligent work, we'd successfully driven Azhag out, with the entirety of the Empire restored under our control. While our orc genocide was going swimmingly in the east, trouble was brewing in the south, led by none other than Wurzag himself.
I'm over here stroking my dick. I got lotion on my dick.
What started as rumblings had grown into a full-scale naval invasion. 8 20-stack Wa armies sailing straight for me, all with one goal in mind. To defend our western borders, we recruited an army made entirely of Master Chief's distant cousins. 3 new variants of Uber brothers joined the roster, one wielding flamethrowers, one lugging around actual cannons, and one just with a sword and shield. With firepower like this, we could spew napalm to melt savages alive within seconds of their suicidal charge, all the while farming infinite aura. Our defenders and poleaxes formed a wall of steel on the front line that stopped infantry and monsters alike. With this setup, we tore out a huge chunk from their invading force. Meanwhile, Karl had been resisting Wurzag's assault on the mainland, fending off his arachnophobia the only way he knew how, unloading the magazine. In battles like this one, where I was hopelessly outmatched, it forced me to use the slop between my ears that some call a brain. I sent our steam copters straight for their strongest units. Then, I employed hit-and-run tactics with my grenade-launching cav. Almost every man we had was either crushed or impaled, but somehow we scraped out the win. It was victories like this that shaped the war, clearing the way for our stronger armies to push forward. The problem, however, was that our advance through Greenland fell outside the bounds of Osh's jurisdiction, leading to debuffs that hinder replenishment and recruitment severely, and with no shortage of bullshit to throw at us. I continually found myself in less than ideal situations. If you don't know Wurzag, then let me tell you, this guy is bad news. Not only can he conjure dark rituals to blow your face off, but he'll cap it off with a brain rot TikTok dance on your grave. So, shredding him with bullets was our first priority. With him out of the way, our next goal was surviving the American healthcare system, because our entire army was on life support. Even with more protection than triple layer rubber, we still got knocked up. And if it wasn't for our panzers, we might have actually lost, who all rolled into the next battle, barely held together by loose bolts. Fighting with armies that are basically already dead before the battle even starts is a unique challenge. It's kind of like boxing. Hit and don't get hit. And when it comes to packing a punch, no one does it better than the Hellhammer cannon. This is the Gherkin, the jawbreaker, the guy she tells you not to worry about. With our thick loads from above and below, our sheer unbridled size was enough to turn the tide and pulled off an underdog victory for the ages. After surviving nearly 100 turns of the orc onslaught, it was finally our turn to go on the offensive and erase these 3 pricks for good. First up, Scarsnik, breathing only because of his colleagues' repeated attempts to decapitate me. We annexed his leftover ghettos and cornered him in his final holdout at Nagashazar. Our makeshift army of Mahatma Grandes and World War II vets opened up, and after a small scuffle, the city crumbled under our heavy ordnance. With Scarsnik gone, we had eliminated the second green-skinned dictator, triggering another cash injection for the survivors, with Grimgor, the strong
silent type,
pocketing both Grom's and Scarsnik's shares, who was shaping up to be the last true powerhouse on the board. With 2 down, next up was Azhag. Elspeth had already taken out a large amount of his forces, but there was still more to go. By now, Elspeth had grown to max level with insane amounts of regeneration and even had her very own restock ability, essentially turning her into an engineer on a dragon. Our brother commander wasn't far behind. However, he was in a continual state of rapid decomposition as his silhouette started to resemble my sleep paralysis demon. We met Azhag in a monumental showdown. Elspeth insisted on sending him off personally, once more trauma dumping all over his face. Our tanks and steam copters dismembered their vile spawn, while our genetically engineered humans and airships handled traffic control. Across 4 brutal battles, we hacked, slashed, blasted, and exterminated more than 12,000 orcs. Meanwhile, across the sea, we launched our counterattack on Wurzag, establishing a beachhead at Lashik. Our naval invasion was a complete success. Before long, we'd captured all of Araby. The Empire's counterattack steamrolled forward, and after more victories, both Azhag and Wurzag were hanging on by a thread. Wurzag tried one last stand in the desert. To his credit, giant spiders and axe-wielding schizoids massacred one of my armies, but his success didn't last long. Soon, both of them were reduced to only a single settlement each. Azhag mounted his final defense with the tactic of huddling all his units in a corner so they could get blown apart by artillery. Truly, the genius of our time. We We took his final settlement and destroyed him for good. Then came Wurzag's final stand. This one was actually tougher, pushing our steel super soldiers to the edge, each one slashing and blowing orc savage. Wait, what? Eventually we won and wiped out Wurzag. Now, only one final greenskin remained. Grimgor. In his dying breath, Wurzag unleashed one last spell, dragging all 9 of my armies to his final resting place, and crushed every last one, besides Elspeth and Karl. Then, Grimgor had his final cash injection. This time, it wasn't 50 grand, because he'd invested in the Owak Tor coin pump and dump, and he was suddenly a millionaire. On top of all that, for the past 100 turns, he'd been training a new and powerful breed of greenskins, the Darkland Orcs, now fielding units like 200-ton giant drakes and orcs with gigantic cannons. No, not those cannons. And warhammers. To top it off, I installed a mod that literally lets him cheat, giving him reduced upkeep from 20% up to 70% and an increased recruitment cap up to 10 units. On turn 120, the Great Grimgor invasion began. In just a handful of turns, he ripped through 13 of my settlements along the border before we could even react, with their new Darkland Orcs emasculating our helpless defenders. In my human arrogance, I thought the orc threat was all but defeated. However, the giant green dick of revenge rarely comes lubed. According to the CIA handbook, the first step to destabilizing a global superpower is seeding sleeper agents everywhere in the enemy's cities, blending in and reporting back to get a measure on Grimgor's true strength. By this point, Karl had finally arrived and intercepted 2 of the invading orc armies. Although Grimgor's Ardboys started strong, Karl was no stranger to killing orcs. With the combined power of our high explosive shells and aerial bombardments, we decimated over 4,000 of them, unfortunately losing 2 steam copters in the process. Shortly after, Elspeth took on another 2 wars, fielding a host of incredibly dangerous monsters, most notably their tier 5 Drake, which I focused on with every chopper I had. But this thing had so much health that it still made it to the front line, overpowering my infantry. However, after being weakened from our fire, some tank volleys to the chest were enough to do the trick, and with him gone, the rest of them crumbled pretty quickly. Although some people might choose to play as the orcs because of their charm and charisma, they never choose to play them because of their ranged units. For the most part, they had very little ways to deal with our aerial superiority, and in some battles, the AI would completely shit itself and blob up, allowing us to blow them to smithereens. This led to a string of ridiculous victories, taking out thousands of orcs with virtually no losses of our own. In fact, it was actually better for them if they came without reinforcements, because if they did, they would wait for them to arrive before attacking, meaning we had 2 full minutes with them. More than enough time for me to finish, and also launch a formal inquest into them for false advertising. Naturally, after becoming the undisputed apex predator, my head got a little large, so I sent Karl ahead to take on 10 20-stack orc armies alone. In a battle where you kill almost 5,000 of them and lose only 7 of your own. You might think you did a good job, but in actual fact, you did horribly, because now you were a unit down, with another 6 stacks waiting to feast on your flesh. This would prove to be Karl's undoing, as he was attacked yet again by Grimgor himself. We blew apart as many orcs as we could with large caliber artillery and high-velocity machine guns, but worn down from seemingly endless swarms of greenskins. Grimgor's forces proved to be too much for us, and Karl and his men were annihilated. Even with this setback, the Empire's war machine kept moving, and over the following turns, we pressed through Grimgor's territory, pushing him back to his last settlements. In one final fuck you to the Empire, Grimgor somehow corralled every defeated lord into one place for the ultimate showdown. Every army stacked with more bullshit than the last. But with Karl back, we had just the thing to deal with moments like this. It was finally time to
Summon the Elector Counts.
First up is Elspeth vs Grom and Wurzag. Elspeth immediately went after Grom, who I tried to support with our choppers, but they were dogpiled by flying lizards. This gave Grom and his squigs the opportunity to smash into my poleaxe infantry. We'd already taken some heavy losses. Then Wurzag showed up, with a dozen more giant rock formations and arachnarok spiders, flinging heaping piles of shit at us. We managed to take out their wyverns, clearing our steam copters to butcher Wurzag and his stupid little boar. Fuck you, stupid boar. Then, an absolute clusterfuck erupted in melee, and eventually they started to crumble. With the battle won, Grom and Wurzak were no more. This was it. One final battle for mankind. Karl against the remaining Orc forces, containing Scarsnik, Azhag, and some random. Spearheaded by none other than Grimgor himself. They came with hordes of the strongest units on the Orc roster. Rogue idols, wyverns, lava spiders, squigs, and various artillery. Our air support got to work straight away, taking down one monster at a time with high-powered ammunition, whilst I set our tanks up with a clear path to fire. Then, their reinforcements arrived, and all plans went out the window as we were hit by green skin abominations from every side. This was no longer just a battle, it was a fight for survival. Their wyverns chewed through our steamcopters, whilst giants and lava spiders pinned down our panzers. With each of the greenskin lords speedrunning a domestic, the cracks in our defenses were starting to show. The first priority was to eliminate their heavy hitters, so we split up detachments of air support to fire from above. In the meantime, our armoured units on the ground soaked up as much damage as possible from the Orc assault. After taking down several large monsters, we started to make some progress, most notably by killing Azhag. With our tanks and airships freed up, we focused on blasting apart their armoured infantry from the sky. Before long, both Grimgor and Scarsnik fell, and without their lords to lead them, the remaining Orc forces soon shattered. With heavy human losses, the remaining 3 Orc lords had been defeated, and we captured the last of Grimgor's land, wiping out the final Greenskin faction. After 150 turns, 284 settlements captured, over 500 battles fought, and 7,621 units destroyed, humanity had survived and brought an end to the Orc apocalypse once and for all. Now, we humans could finally go back to doing what we do best, fighting amongst ourselves.